the Pan-African Television for you, Media Africa. Welcome to Global Insight this day, ladies and gentlemen, where we dive into the latest development shaping the world's political landscape. Today we are going to focus on the impact of the 2024 elections in France and on global geopolitics, with recent events unfolding in French politics, particularly Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party surge and the anticipated second round of voting. Several pressing geopolitical questions arise, prompting us to analyze this day the potential ramifications of the development in the political sphere in France. The disapproval in Emmanuel Macron's leadership was again evident in his party's performance, coming third in the snap elections or legislative elections. The last event, however, marks a major turning point in France after the Second World War. Will there be a potential shift in the foreign policy of France? What should we expect to be France's position on the Ukrainian crisis, the Israeli onslaught on Palestinians, and immigration, Brexit, and most importantly, relations with the African continent? Is France moving to a potential coalition parliament? The stakes are, however, high in France. So stay connected with us as we uncover this in today's edition of Global Insight. The stakes are indeed high as we navigate the development in the political scene in France, looking at the geopolitical impact of the involvement in France. This stems from the June 30 legislative elections, where we saw Marine Le Pen's national rally coming first, and then the leadership of Emmanuel Macron standing again to prove itself, but this time around the polls coming from the 30th of June elections saw that Macron is increasingly losing it in France. What are the the implications or the ramifications of the political changes in France on the global landscape, especially on the country's foreign policy relating to the crisis in Ukraine, the Israeli onslaught on Palestinians? Also, we look at the position on and the clear relationship with the African continent. So, with a panel of experts, we are going to discuss constructively the analysis and also to see the way forward, given the major shifts which are occurring across Europe and even the global world. And I think it's with pleasure that we introduce, let's start by acknowledging CHRISTELLE NÈANT, who is Editor-in-Chief for International Reporters. Hello to you, CHRISTELLE, and thanks for making it count this day on Global Insight.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
Looking forward to having a constructive discussion with you alongside other panelists. To the United States of America, let's acknowledge ACHILLE, who is a banker, international financial expert. Hello to you, Mr. Eke. A pleasure having you again on this platform.
Good afternoon, Clarice. Good afternoon, all the panels. This is a pleasure for me to be part of this fantastic conversation today.
Indeed.
What happens in France is very important to Africa, and I'm going to be, mostly analyzing this situation from the Pan-Africanist movement's angle. So thank you so much for inviting me.
It is indeed interesting, Achille Eke, noting the position of France in the European Union and relating, of course, to France's relationship with the African continent and how these major changes are going to affect further the very frail relationship that is already existing between France and former colonies. And let's also acknowledge HARLEY, who is international spokesperson of SCHILLER Institute. Hello to you, dear HARLEY, and thanks for respecting our rendezvous this day.
Well, Clarice, thank you again for your invitation. This is an important topic because it's not just France, but all of Europe, which is feeling the tremors of the current changes in the world. And I think Europe is lagging behind, but I think this is something we can discuss fruitfully with this panel.
Indeed, the stakes are high across Europe, everywhere in the world. So how can we bring constructive and elitist analysis into balancing these changes occurring? I think we'll be going now to Ghana. We're going to join FIDEL, also international relations expert and security analyst. Hi, FIDEL.
Yeah, hello. Thanks for having me once again. And I'd like to extend my greetings to my co-panelists and their viewers. Thank you.
Thank you too for giving it importance to a rendezvous this day. Let's end the introductory phase of the panel with ARNAUD, a political consultant. Hello to you, Dovely, and happy to have you once more.
Hello, Clarice. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to a fruitful discussion.
Indeed, looking forward to a fruitful discussions. The latter hours of Sunday, the 7th of July 2024, France will know the composition or the makeup of the National Assembly, its lower house of parliament, and of course making the anxiety to be high as the country prepares for the second round of voting tomorrow, that is Sunday, the 7th of July. And this, of course, will make us understand and really, look at the major turning point in France, the first to be noted after the Second World War. And we kick off the conversation with you, Achille, with, a discursive analysis of what you think holistically about the changes in France, its impact on the African continent, and how it is also affecting the Eurozone and other, states across the global world.
Well, I call this the French electoral tremors in African awakening. The far-right national rally has shaken Europe with its hopeful performance in the recent elections. From an African vantage point, the political tremors presents an opportunity to refocus and reflect on the vision of the rising continent. For many years, France has maintained a paternalistic relationship with its former African colonies, known as France-Afrique. This dynamic of neo-colonialism has been a thorn in the side of true African independence and Pan-African unity for, well, decades. Now, politics are changing in France, opening up an unprecedented opportunity for African countries to forever alter the pace of a journey towards true sovereignty and self-reliance. Much more damagingly, the rise of far-right sentiment in France could translate into harmful protectionist immigration laws and possible slashing of aid to African nations. This is perhaps short-term pain, but does underline how much there is a pressing need for African countries to break the chains of dependency. The official from Senegal puts it point blank. The new generation, quote, the new generation no longer sees Paris as the metronome of our lives, end quote. The time to interpolate and reinvigorate Pan-African ideas is now. The fact that France readapts its military deployments in Africa, especially in the Sahel, opportune doors are open to African-led security initiatives and regional cooperation. This will be the time for African countries to take full charge of their security apparatus, devoid of external interference. The political dynamics in France are changing, and this creates room for fast-tracking the decolonization process. If France is probably going to look inward, and an opportunity is created for African countries to chart independent path that help strengthen ties within Africa and solidly determine the future shape of geopolitics on the continent. The AFTA and Agenda 2063 of the African Union are instruments for this new drive at continental unity and prosperity. However, Pan-Africanists must be wary of invited guests who view a power vacuum created by the retreating France as an opportune moment to make this influence count. Instead, their influence count in the region. Following this line of thinking, it calls for an Africa led by both its leadership and citizens that is united and able to engage the world on mutually respectful terms and principles built on reciprocity and shared interests. While the French elections may seem far away to most Africans today, their ripple effects do offer a great opportunity to put on stage the ideals of Pan-Africanism. Of these changing tides, what shall be required is only nimbleness to move with the flow, but never to forget the stimulating charge of Kwame Nkrumah. We face neither east nor west. We face forward. End quote. It is time for Africa to chart its way, steered by unity, self-reliance, and common prosperity. Precisely those ideals central to Pan-Africanism. Thank you.
Indeed, Achille Eke, what is happening across the global world gives an opportunity for Africa to redefine its position, especially in the quest to be part of the world, the multipolar world. And we're continuing the conversation with you, Christelle, looking at the stakes which we have already underlined in our preamble regarding the political development in France holistically, and of course as a French citizen. What can you see patterning these major changes which have occurred in France, where you see even Marie Le Pen parties coming actually ahead, and with now the dynamics changing, where we see some parties actually stepping out of the second race to be able to kill the Marie Le Pen's party. What do you think actually provoked this drastic political change in France?
No, I think that it was awaited. We knew already from the polls that the party of Marine Le Pen will really do a great score. We already knew before the first tour that it would be the case. The thing is that usually the threat of the coming to power of this party is used by other parties from the left wing to keep in place. We have seen that with the second re-election of Emmanuel Macron. He did everything so that Marine Le Pen ends in the second tour against him, and it allowed him to stay in place, to obtain a second mandate. So it unfortunately could be such a maneuver again. So to use it as a useful, repulsive enemy to keep left wing or central wing, because the party of Emmanuel Macron is not a left wing party, it's a central fascist party. But to keep in place with parties which can accommodate with him, it can be useful for him to have them at the second tour. We already see discussions, negotiations between Emmanuel Macron's party and parties from the left wing. This party from this Popular Front that has been created, like, okay, if you get out in this circumscription, okay, then we will give you, if we win all together and we can make like a coalition, then you will have some posts of minister or secretary of state or something like that. So we already see this kind of, political negotiations between party of Emmanuel Macron and the parties from the left wing. So it can be also an opportunity for Emmanuel Macron to stay at power with a coalition which he can more or less, lead without having the bad situation of a cohabitation with a party which is completely opposed to him. So for the moment, we see all these games, political games, alliances which are building, just using the Rassemblement National as these mannequins you put in the fields to frighten the ravens. It's the same. So let's see if this time it works, or perhaps it will not. For the moment, the polls are really giving an image of really uncertainty about the results of the second tour. Perhaps the party of Marine Le Pen will have like a slight majority, not a full majority, but a slight majority, which can lead to a cohabitation government, which means Prime Minister could be Jordan Bardella and the President will be Emmanuel Macron. It will not be the first time we have this in France. We already had this kind of situation, and each time it helped the president in place to be able to obtain a second mandate. So let's see how it will turn, but for the moment there are lots of uncertainties due to all these games and negotiations which are done in the backyard.
Very imperative, and of course looking at what coalition government or parliament will mean for France's foreign policies, especially its position in the European Union, and of course the coming together of parties with similar and also different ideologies. What would this mean for the Eurozone itself? And this is the question I'm directing to you, Harley SCHLANGER. Some 2 years ago, during a debate, a TV debate between Marine Le Pen and Emmanuel Macron, Le Pen blamed Macron for defending an illusional European sovereignty rather than the sovereignty of France in all dimensions. What fate for France's position in the EU? Should there be a coalition government or parliament in France, and if Marine Le Pen's party should be the majority in the France's parliament?
Well, let me approach this from the broadest standpoint, which is that Europe as a whole is undergoing a moment of reaction to changes in the world. And the biggest change is that Europe is finding that its portion of the world economy is shrinking, its influence in the world is declining, and the reason for this is that the European Union and NATO have attached themselves to the Anglo-American Empire and have essentially given up the sovereignty of their own nations. Macron is an example of this. He's all over the place. One minute he's talking about France as the mediator between the West and Russia. France will work with China. The next minute he's talking about boots on the ground in Ukraine. The next minute he's kicked out of Africa. He's a man searching for a mission. And the French people are getting tired of it. The French economy is stagnant. The European economies as a whole are stagnating. Meanwhile, we're seeing something new emerge, the BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, a move away from the blackmail of the dollar. And I say that as an American patriot who's sad to see that the United States is being left behind because of its failed policies. So I think I like what ACHILLE said about a chance to really experience sovereignty, explore what it means to be a sovereign nation without having to look over your shoulder at the bankers from the IMF and the assassins from the CIA. Perhaps we have an opportunity now for Africa to emerge, as we're seeing with the voices of the global South speaking confidently about the emergence of a new order. Now, the emergence of the global South reminds us of what happened in the mid-50s with Bandung and the non-aligned movement. And at that time, the West was able to sabotage it. And it included an era of 30 or so regime change coups, assassinations, civil wars, and other kinds of wars. I don't think today, with the West showing that it can't win in Ukraine, the problems with imposing an apartheid regime on the Palestinians being fought to a standstill by the Palestinians, and the West talking about taking on China on top of this. And then you see the Sunak kicked out, and I don't think people are going to be very happy with what they see with Starmer. The French situation is going to be very unstable. And on top of that, you have Joe Biden, who no indication of whether he's going to be around. So it's an ideal moment in a vacuum of power politics for the emergence of a multipolar world. And to me, this is what will determine the African nation's relationship with countries like France, rather than what the French want. And I think this is a kind of world turned upside down that we haven't seen since the time of the American Revolution and the defeat of the British Empire. So it's a terribly exciting moment, but it's going to require wisdom, patience, and leadership. And I think we see that coming from many nations in Africa. We don't see it coming from the nations of Europe and the West.
Indeed, the world is at a major turning point where supposed great powers are becoming more problematic and given, an opportunity for other emerging powers to bring forth ideologies which can unite the global world together. Let's, continue the integration with Fidel. Here we want to stress again on the position of France in the European Union and the decisions that have to be taken patterning the Ukrainian crisis. We mentioned earlier on that the turning points in France will also determine, the decisions which will be taken in line with the crisis, knowing fully well that Le Pen is, against deployment of French troops in the Donbass. So, how are the political changes in France affecting indirectly the decision of the European Union, potentially concerning the crisis in the Donbass and elsewhere?
Thank you very much, Madam, for the question. Firstly, I would like to say that the reason for these elections is because of an earlier elections, European Union elections. So legislators that were during the election, France centrists lost so much grounds to the far right and the far left, and so Emmanuel Macron called these elections in order to reset or perhaps correct the political errors he might have made in the country to really lead to the loosening of grounds of centrists in the European Parliament. And so actually this was a miscalculation. If you look at the result that has emerged, it was a massive miscalculation that the French system allowed Macron to undertake. For my African audience, I will have to explain a little bit of how this the French system works. Mostly in Africa, we have first past the post electoral system. So if you are going to parliament, if you get a simple majority, you get to go there. So if you had whichever percentage, 33% of the vote, and the other competitors are no closer, then you take the lead. You can just win by a vote. However, in France, before you go to the National Assembly, you need a majoritarian lead. So they practice the majoritarian system at the legislative level. And that is how come the first round just got a number of people into the National Assembly, and they have to go for a second round tomorrow. And if you look at the tactics that the centrists are adopting, they would like to frustrate the coming in or the rise of the far right. And so some candidates have pulled out in order to give their support to centrists who may then beat down the kind of momentum that the far right and the far left are gathering. Now, the European Union, I would like to say that in as much as this is happening, we should not exaggerate what the right is likely to do if they should get power. Because you saw it in Italy currently. We see the far right in Italy, but we are not seeing any radical actions that was they were accused of before they took over. Some people felt that the rise of the right means the resuscitation of Nazism, fascism, and things like that. Yeah. But in Italy, we don't see the current prime minister throwing his weight behind Putin that much, even though she's open to some negotiations. She has been quite of a player within the European system. In fact, when it came to migration, people thought that the right is going to be very, very, anti-migration, and perhaps Italy would have gone solo with its immigration policy. But no, the current prime minister is seeking the support of the rest of Europe in tackling migration. So I think that campaigning or electioneering rhetoric is different from governance. And so, despite what people see Marine Le Pen to be, she is not coming to do, I don't see her coming to do anything radical in France. Because sometimes the system is overwhelming. After decades of centrist rule, it will be very impractical to just enter and go, make do with the policies you have preferred or you have talked about before campaigning. And so I see that happening. Yesterday, we saw European leaders actually criticizing Viktor Orban for being in Moscow and claiming to be representing the European Union. Now, these are signs that, the European Union has come to, despite all the challenges that come with it, it has come to stay. And in fact, an election in France will not end or collapse the European Union. Then, to the other side of the Mediterranean, which is Africa. Now, if you look at the far right, and there is this very confusing policy when it comes to post-colonialism or neo-colonialism, as Mr. EKEU talked about. For instance, in southern France, we have what we call the Blackfoot guys, people who were settlers in Algeria, and who still claim that Algeria should be the backyard garden of France. And these are all guys who support the far right. So if the far right take over, it does not necessarily mean that they are going to abandon French post-colonial policy in Africa. It is going to continue. And in fact, it could get more complicated than what people perceive, because then they believe that the French community should not just collapse. They feel that there's supposed to be some changes, but it's rather the left that calls for a redefinition of the relationship between France and its former colonies in Africa. So weeks ago, we found a French leftist leader in Senegal where he discussed a lot of things with the Prime Minister of Senegal, Sonko. And among the things are that France should leave Senegal, should get rid of its military bases and other military interests in Senegal. So this is very complicated, but as we go on, a lot is going to come up, and then we would have to demystify. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, it's about understanding the stakes and, of course, seeing how we can dissociate politics from governance. To you, Arnaud DEVELAY, we are looking at the two, especially the major thing that led to Emmanuel Macron calling for snappy elections in France. We're looking at the results of the EU. Now, how do the results of the EU and the legislative elections in France reflect broader trends in European politics, particularly concerning the rise of far-right nationalism and challenges to traditional centrist parties, with France being the case study?
Yes, thank you very much again for having me today.
Please, can you
I have heard a lot of somewhat confused notion and perception about the political situation in France, how this relates to the EU, how will the foreign policy, quote unquote, of France change as a result of the first round election a week ago, and about what is the far right, representing in the mind of people. Mm-hmm. I will start by saying I will echo what CHRISTELLE NÈANT said on the onset, which is that the real fascism in France today is what we call the centrist movement. Yeah. They basically are the representative of the Brussels Commission, of the Davos crowd, and as such, some people have argued that many of them, and it's not me saying it, it's Klaus Schwab himself, they control all the governments in the West, essentially. They rig the elections, they prevent popular will from expressing itself, and have this kind of post-national, what should I call it, crypto-communism, techno-communism agenda in place, where the human body itself is the new frontier. This is the new colonies for them. Mm-hmm. So, as CHRISTELLE was saying, those far-right movements, if anything, are somewhat instrumentalized to allow for the establishment parties to remain in place. And it goes so far, and the farce is so, to add insult to injury, that those establishment parties don't hesitate to keep their control over the affairs of the state, or what's left of it, to strike alliances with the far left, which is ideologically very compatible with those centrist movements. Let's not forget that Emmanuel Macron was a minister of the economy in François Hollande's government, mm-hmm. When François Hollande was president of France from 2012 to 2017. So all those people essentially are ideologically fellow travelers. Let's make no mistake about it. Now, as you mentioned, there was the result of the European election, and as our colleague in Ghana mentioned, it's a different type of election. It's a one-wrong election, full proportional model, meaning that it's a lot more representative than the current French system we have, which is a majority system, which allows through the second round all kind of combination to take place, henceforth rigging the popular will and really getting to the background, the real intention of the French people, as it were. And we might just be seeing this again this time around, albeit with one caveat. Emmanuel Macron decided to dissolve the National Assembly, mm-hmm. Because he knows that after 7 years of his tenure, it's become increasingly and politically unsustainable for him to push forward and administer the affairs of the state through McKinsey and those technocrats that basically have no legitimacy whatsoever. Yeah. It got so bad that the Macron relative majority in parliament, stemming from the 2022 parliamentary elections, mm-hmm. had to resort to using the Article 49.3, which basically allows the government to push through its draft legislations without trying to build any kind of consensus. So in the context that sees the budget for 2025 looming as a debate on the floor of the National Assembly, and with France basically buried in debt, 3,000 billion euros in debt, an economy on the standstill, a bloated Leviathan state based on redistribution, a lack of manufacturing, having been gutted in the wake, of course, of the Cold War, but going back in the early 1980s when François Mitterrand actually abandoned the platform on which he had been elected and initiated this reorientation toward European integration. France has been relegated to a second-rate power.
Okay.
And so now the emperor has no clothes, if anything. We've come to a terminal stage of this charade. And Macron is a very astute and Machiavellic individual. He knew very well that there's no clear majority as of today in France.
Yeah.
And that as such, if anything, there's more likely a potential for frontal civil strife, if not outright civil war, if provocations are fed in that direction.
Okay.
For him to invoke Article 16 eventually and assume complete executive power with a mere nod to the Constitutional Council, which he has under his control.
Mm-hmm.
This is in that context that those elections are extremely fraught with peril. And if anything, I don't expect any clear majority to emerge from tomorrow's second round. It will be a landlocked election result, deadlock. And I would go forward as to say that we may see great chaos coming, and the financial markets have already warned that they were willing to push the nuclear option on France in the result of in the wake of the election tomorrow.
Yeah.
The country has become unmanageable, ungovernable, and we may be seeing the opportunity for the financial markets to use their palm, Macron, to assume the full power, to assume through Article 16 the emergency powers, and rule by decree, like what we saw in Italy with Draghi, who is a fellow traveler of Macron. And let's make no mistake about it. BlackRock has its representative sitting at the Conseil des Ministres every Wednesday. BlackRock is making policy in France,
Okay.
not the French state, for whatever that means. And in that regard, right now, it's all about trying to grab the savings of the French population, which is among the highest in Europe. We're talking about 2,000 billion euros.
Okay.
And so this is what BlackRock is interested in. And if it means creating a pandemonium in France to allow those financial markets to then deep six France, the way they've done it with Greece in 2010, then it's all part of the plan and everything is going according to it.
Okay. Okay.
Make no mistake about it.
All right, thank you for the greater insight, Arnaud DEVELAY. Subsequently, we are going to continue uncovering and discovering the stakes in France and elsewhere. Let me come back to you, Achille Eki. From what you highlighted earlier on, the question is how can African countries proactively prepare for the possible shifts and work towards greater self-reliance and sovereignty in light of these political changes in France?
Well, we're hoping that everything goes bad in France. Seriously, I mean, so they can deal with their mess. While they're dealing with their mess, we are focusing on building Africa. Today is a very important day, Clarisse. The Sahelian leaders are meeting today in Niamey, in Niger. And we are looking forward to something fantastic coming out of that first meeting of the leaders of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's the whole population in that area is on fire. People are excited. People are excited about what the future looks like, what's going to come out of that meeting. And I've been watching videos live coming from in that area today, and I'm so excited because this is what we're looking for. This for the first time in maybe 1,000 years. Okay, I don't know the time frame, maybe 700,000, 700 years, 1,000 years, whatever. we are looking for at Africa, trying to create something unique without any white people, not to be racist, any white leader from a Western country being part of it. Yeah. It's something phenomenal that people are looking, and it feels like we're dreaming. So let France deal with all this mess. You know, they created all that stuff. We're not going to worry about them. You know, we don't care about what's happening there, even though it's going to have some impacts in Africa. But we need to focus on building in what's good for Africa. It's time to turn inward ourselves and see what can we do based on what we've been, going through for the past 1,000 years with these, Western countries coming to our shores. Giving us flowers, talking about God, with the Bible in hands, and killing our people like goats, killing them, colonizing them, taking everything, ravaging all the areas because they're looking for supremacy. They're looking for people to work in their farms, slaves. They're looking for whatever minerals we have, controlling our people. We're tired of it. So we are the first generation to witness something unique happening in Africa, and we are glad that what's happening in France, it's happening. I mean, we don't wish ill on the population in France, but the government is the one that creating all these situations, and we're gonna let them deal with it. Now, whether it's Marine Le Pen or Macron or whoever, we know they're gonna do the same thing when it comes to international or French interest. They're going to be doing the same thing regardless of what party they come from. There's no illusion about that. So we have to focus, us in Africa, on what is good for us, organize ourselves, get rid of that France CFA, that's been bothering, Germany estimated to, how much, about $400 billion being taken from Africa every year. $400 billion being taken from Africa, that's benefiting France every year using the CFA franc. It's just mind-boggling. This is Western countries' estimation. That's Germany. Yeah. And so it's been happening for generations, and which is the time for us to look inward, and try to figure out how can we benefit from this situation in France. How can we use that opportunity to create a path for ourselves? We've already been building bridges with the BRICS countries, namely Russia, China, Turkey, Iran, and other countries, yeah. Brazil, people, countries of the Great South. We've been building those bridges already, and now we need to, put all that opportunity in motion. And the Sahelian countries are showing us the way. And so, I think this is what we need to focus on. The elections in France are distraction for us. Whatever happens there, they're going to deal with it anyway. So, thank you.
Of course, your opinion, like we always say, that we have the right to our opinion. But then, given the interconnectedness of the world, should we be, adamant to the major changes that are occurring elsewhere? Coming back to you, Christelle, when we look at the development in France in recent times, we'll see that there has been a lot of discontentment patterning the leadership of Emmanuel Macron. Can we maybe answer the question, should Macron resign if its party loses this legislative post? Will it not already be showing the frailty of his leadership, given that the party, even during the second round, still misses to garner, a lead in the legislative post?
No, I think honestly that if Emmanuel Macron would have any honor, he already would have resigned. When General de Gaulle was in minority in the polls, and he resigned. He was an honorable man, and he said, if I don't have the support of the majority of the people, then I get out, because it means that I'm not governing in the interest of the people. But Emmanuel Macron has not this honor. He's governing for, like ARNAUD said, interest of big international companies like BlackRock, like Vanguard, State Street, all these big investment companies which are now pillaging really Ukraine, for example. but also a lot of countries around the world, including in Africa. These companies are the real ones who are governing. It's not France, you know. I think a lot of people are really dissatisfied with the politics of Emmanuel Macron. It was what they showed during these European elections. They showed that they don't support his politics. But the problem is the politics of Emmanuel Macron, and on this I join other panelists, is not defined by himself. It's the policy of European Union, which is itself dictated by Washington, but not by Joe Biden, who even don't remember who he is and where he is. You know, it's all fixed by all these big investment companies. Because all these investment companies, they have a lot of interest, including in the military, industrial companies. So for them, it's interesting to push war around the world. Then they can buy, like in Ukraine, assets for pennies, and they get richer and richer thanks to this politics. So what I'm afraid is that even if people show discontent for the policy of Emmanuel Macron, even if they push for a change of politics, in reality, as far as France is staying inside the European Union, there will be no change. It will be like in Italy. It was said by another panelist. Meloni had great speech when she was a candidate. But what we see now is in Italy, we don't see a big change. We don't see Italy getting out of European Union. We don't see Italy closing its borders. Why? Because it's not Meloni who is really governing, who is really deciding. It's European Union, and above European Union, it's Washington and all these big companies, these big corporations. So for me, of course, it's already a long time that Emmanuel Macron should have resigned. Already when there was the movement of the yellow vests, I mean, there were millions of people in the streets. He should have resigned already at this moment, but he did not, because this man wants to be in power. It's a very narcissistic person. Even some psychiatrists said that it's a very manipulative, narcissistic psychopath, you know. So he likes to be in power. He likes to be at this place. So he doesn't want to leave it, and that's why I think there is also all these intrigues, all these political games to make like a new coalition with some left parties which are compatible with his politics to stay in place and to continue his task of destroying completely France, because that's his task. It's destroying completely France, destroying all the social system which has been built after the Second World War by the General de Gaulle. His aim is to really destroy France, like they have destroyed Greece, like they have destroyed other countries, again, for this company to buy assets which are really valuable for some pennies, for some cents. And I think, unfortunately, he will not leave. Even if he has to go through cohabitation with Jordan Bardella as a prime minister, for him it's benefits, because even if he cannot sign for a third mandate, then he can, after this cohabitation, when everything will go bad, because we see the situation in France, as ARNAUD said, the economic situation is really bad. I mean, I have insights from France, people from my close ones who told me that the situation is really, really catastrophic. And the situation will go further in this catastrophe. And so I think the aim also of Emmanuel Macron, if he goes to a cohabitation with Jordan Bardella or Marine Le Pen, then he can say, oh, you see, there was a disaster, economic chaos, but I'm not guilty. You know, it's a government from Jordan Bardella or from Marine Le Pen. And so after, he can push his own successor, like, for example, Gabriel Attal. So I don't expect a huge change in French politics, but what I expect is a growing chaos in France, because the gap between what the people want, what they expect, and what the government is doing is going wider and wider.
Please understand. understanding the political rhetorics will come to understanding and answering this question. Harley, some years ago we were talking about Brexit, and today again, if I listen keenly to what ARNAUD propounded, and even what CHRISTELLE and yourself and others have highlighted so far as to some of the political rhetorics which occur within the European Union that prevents countries from acting independently, especially when it's sovereignty and or maybe the will of the people actually on the balance. So I will appreciate if you analyze more on the aspect of Brexit. Do you think with the turning point at the political level in France, if the national, the Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party comes to the fore, are there hopes of France leaving the European Union, and how will this detach the country from the control of the collective West, that it can redefine its policies that will suit particularly the French people, as advocated by some politicians for France, to consider more of the French people than an illusional European Union that doesn't have a sovereignty to talk about?
Well, I'm finding this discussion so far very, very interesting, because what is coming out is something that you won't get from a political science professor or a media. The idea, and I think Fidel said that the center tends to hold. I don't think that's going to happen anymore. I think we're going to see the governments in Europe splitting apart. The people are angry. The economies are collapsing. Here in Germany, we have deindustrialization going on. And it's because of the policies of the Greens, the failure of Scholz to define a German national mission, the Liberal Democrats who have a say over taxation and other things. So I think what we're seeing is the failure of the system overall, the breakdown of this neoliberal model that was declared the sole superpower of the United States after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. The idea that there's only one system, this is the rules-based order, and everyone has to line up. And I think Monsieur DEVELAY was absolutely right in saying that the fascism is not coming from the far right. I think the right and left are failed paradigms right now. The attempt to split people into these categories doesn't work anymore. We have the Blinken touring the world talking about the rules-based order. Well, is providing 3,000-pound bombs to Israel to kill Palestinian children, is that part of a rules-based order? Is sanctions killing people in Yemen and other countries rules-based order? Stepping aside and allowing the civil war to destroy Sudan, is that part of the rules-based order? So I think this idea of a unipolar order holding things together has failed. And what we are seeing, and this gets to the point ACHILLE was making, this is an opportunity, not just for African countries, but also Malaysia, Thailand, Bolivia, Mexico. They're moving into this area of what you might call non-aligned, and they're looking at different models. The Western neoliberal model has failed. That's why Macron has failed. That's why the European Union is splitting apart now. And I think you may not see it totally, but if I was just in the Bundestag the other day, and people were walking around in complete panic because the Scholz government just came out and said the same thing that the so-called far right is saying, which is we have to stop immigration. Well, the Europeans are terrified because the policy of the West has been destroying nations around the world, promoting wars, and that's what created the immigration problem. So the question to me now is, can we find a policy, an economic policy of sovereign nations for mutual benefit that will allow for a break from this so-called unipolar order? And in that, I look at what the Chinese are doing in the Russian-China-India alliance, the idea of state investment in industry, improvement of education, entrepreneurial development, the tech sector. This is the future for Africa. But you're not going to get the credit from the European Union. It's going to have to come from new institutions, maybe the new development bank of the BRICS. So I think as someone said, the mess in France, should we worry about it? Well, you worry about it because people are in trouble and die because of it. But in the meantime, the system doesn't work. So we need to find new ways of doing it, and innovation and creativity. A break from the old is actually, it's going to be rough. It's going to be a difficult time, but we'll get through it as long as we don't cling to people like Macron and Schultz. And I think the election results in England are really useful. But as I said, I think this is going to happen to Labour in a short period of time as well, because they're doing the same thing that the Tories.
Okay, thank you for that, Harley. Just to remind our viewers tuning in that this is Global Insight on For You Media Africa. We are looking at the political ramifications of France's legislative elections, and how will this affect even the country's foreign policies towards international issues. And coming to you, Fidel, Harley, while talking earlier on, highlighted the aspect of immigration, and just as Eke highlighted earlier on, saying what happens in France shouldn't be of concern to Africans. They should focus on what will actually defend its sovereignty. But then I want us to look at it from this perspective, because when major events are happening in countries, especially countries that have closer ties with African countries, Africans are really watching keenly to see the immigration policy that the politicians or the incumbent leaders will adopt. With these changes happening now in France, where we are seeing a possibility of more of a conservative coming to occupy France's parliament, how can this affect, or how will this affect the country's immigration policy with the African continent? And will there be a shift in France's approach to African nations under that, should, in case Le Pen is, we have a Le Pen-led government in France?
Okay. Thank you very much, Madam, once again. Firstly, I would like to say that whatever is happening in Europe is of great concern to Africa. And this is because our history is tied, and we have geopolitical ties that make whatever that happens in Europe affect Africa, and Africa should be concerned about it, because the Mediterranean Sea is not as wide as the Atlantic Ocean, which separates Europe and Africa from South America and North America. The Mediterranean Sea is a narrow sea, and that is why many people in the Sub-Saharan Africa will try to cross it to Europe, because, I mean, when they stood in North Africa, they saw part of Southern Europe, and so we are that close. Now, the same topic, I would say that in 1975, it was a coup in Lisbon that granted independence, or that led to the independence of Portuguese colonies in Africa. So Angola, Mozambique, Cape Verde, and Guinea-Bissau gained independence because of a coup that happened in Lisbon. And there are a lot of European politics, or many instances where European politics have affected significantly the continent in many ways. Now, to the point, I would like to start with a little history. After the Second World War, France moved forward to create the French community. And that was when Charles de Gaulle once again came to lead France. And it was during this time that Africa realized that the French were not going to grant independence, or they were not going to allow its colonies in Africa to gain independence. So they arranged what we call the French community, which was more like or you are independent but not really independent. And that created what we currently see. And the other Europeans, France decided that we will create the French community, and if we did that, then it means that we will still have control over the resources, the politics, the economy of our colonies. And when Guinea, the Republic of Guinea, decided that they will not be part of these arrangements or of that arrangement, it was punished severely. France took away almost everything that it did in Guinea during the colonial administration. They took away everything. It took the Republic of Ghana, my country, to give Guinea 10 million pounds in order to survive as an independent country. Now, going forward, what happened? The other countries copied the French Constitution. So, Etenwa, the French Fifth Republican Constitution, gave the tenure of a president as 7 years. All the French colonies copied that. Again, they adopted what we call the hybrid system, where we have an executive president who then appoints a prime minister. That system was also copied by the former colonies. So Gabon, Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire, and all these Senegal all copied this constitution, hook, line, sinker, without considering their internal dynamics and the differences. So that was really was tied to its former or its colonial master. Going forward, that system has grown stale. It is now obsolete. And from the current movement, youth that are very much informed, criticizing that arrangement between France and their countries, we see a lot of indignation against that particular arrangement. However, I don't see Russia as a legitimate replacement of France. And the reason is that as a security analyst, I've observed what is happening in the Sahel. It is not rosy at all. The insecurity in the Sahel is worse than we saw 2-3 years ago. In fact, now terrorism is ethnicized in the Sahel. If I see that people are hoisting Russian flag, I don't get really pleased, because the ramification is worse than it used to be. Now Wagner is in arrangement with this government, this military government, to take raw resources away from these countries in exchange for security. And even with that, the refugee problem is worse, and that is not rumor, that is not propaganda, that is the reality. We see a lot of these Al-Qaeda and ISIS-linked groups running amok and even threatening coastal states. So, yes, the French colonial system or post-colonial system was exploitative and needed to end, but the replacement is never Russia. And Russia doesn't share the aspiration of African countries. In fact, the oligarchy that is running in Russia, where a few people, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, got to dominate the economy and become multi-billionaires, is not what we need in Africa. Africa needs shared growth, not share growth. That the economy is just growing. We need share growth. The elites that are taking over the continent need to be stopped. And that's what I see in Russia. Russia is much of an elitist system run by a few people over the decades. And that is not what Africa needs. Africa needs to put its interests first, create robust partnership that is a win-win game, and that benefits domestically. Okay. If you took so I will not know, like, just a minute. Yeah. You will talk about the middle powers that we call. So you're talking about Iran, you're talking of Turkey, you're talking of Israel, you're talking of Brazil and other countries like Malaysia, what Mr. SCHLANGER mentioned. And you realize that these countries create more win-win cooperation than a country like, let's say, Russia. China started very good, but currently the environmental issues and other deals like the overburdening debt and the kind of things they demand in exchange for debt management is not something that is good to consider. And so I think that going forward, African countries should, as I always say, put their interests first, negotiate with partners that are willing to engage in win-win cooperation, and move forward with their development. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing your insight on the peculiarities of what is happening in the global world and the African continent, defining its position and, of course, engaging in collaborations that are more mutual than master-servant. Now, to you, Arnaud DEVELAY, maybe you want to react to the analysis actually advocated by FIDEL on the position of Russia and how we relate to the changing political scenes in Europe and particularly in France, and how this actually affects the African continent in reshaping its 21st century collaboration that will lead to the gradual and practical sovereignty of the continent, where its natural resources and other valuables are protected.
Well, thank you for this question. I will address Mr. Fidel's pointed rebuttal bearing on that the salvation will come from the East. I will only quote no less than my friend Kemi Seba, who is a regular visitor in the Federation, who says several times, we're not here to exchange one master for another. So this is definitely something that is pregnant in back of the minds of Pan-Africanist leaders who come to Russia and trying to engage Moscow on collaboration. As far as what would be the impact of, let's make it hypothetical, of Bardella government. Let's actually recontextualize what was the colonial era. Colonialism, French colonialism, is a spawn of the Third Republic. The Third Republic is, by definition, par excellence, the embodiment of Jacobin thought and this idea that, to quote the former Minister of Education at the time, who created the educational Republican system, Jules Ferry, it was, I quote, the responsibility of the superior race to civilize the inferior race. So the essence of French colonialism is a Jacobinistic, far-left project. And the French people themselves, by and large, that is until 1945, 75% of them were from the peasantry, never were involved in any way, shape, or form in this colonial adventure, to such an extent that the elites in Paris had to actually recruit what our colleague earlier mentioned as pieds noirs, people from all over Europe, from Germany, from Spain. But the French, regular French citizen never, partook in this pillage. And it's interesting because somebody mentioned earlier the visit. Most likely, he was referring to Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the current party leader. He heads the La France Insoumise. So he might have said, I don't recall him saying, get rid of all the bases, although his voters are essentially people from African ancestry, so we could surmise that he was trying to promote his electoral expectations in saying that. Let's assume he did say that, but he also said that Senegal, I think it was, should adopt LGBT policies, which is, we can really here sum up this kind of paternalistic, Jacobinistic Third Republic outlook of French elites on Africa as basically this place that needs to be civilized. And this was a very revealing episode, an illustration that old habits die hard.
Okay, thank you for that, Arnaud DEVELAY. Let's get this round with you. Starting off with you, Harley, we continue to look at the political and geopolitical ramifications of the political development in France. Now we see that some of the major problems that the global world is facing actually occupies the debate on so many platforms, how these elections will affect these issues. Let's be particular with the crisis in the Gaza Strip. We're looking again at the Ukrainian crisis, the policy, the immigration policy. So with the will the outcome of tomorrow's second round legislative polls in France affect the country's stance regarding issues like defense, particularly, and immigration? Let's take the case study of Africa and then the Middle East and even Europe, where we see the crisis in the Donbass. Harley?
That's directed to me? Yes, okay. Well, I think I want to go back to something that Christelle said about the economy, because you can't look at the election situation in any country in Europe right now without looking at the economy. And the French economy is stagnant. It had a very poor quarter last year, had a drop in industrial production in June of 2.7%, 3.9% drop in industrial production in France year to year. That's significant. And it had to do with energy prices. It had to do with leading areas, steel, chemical industry, and so on. Similarly, in Germany, we're seeing firms leaving because they can't produce profits because of the high energy prices, the green regulations, and so on. Now, these are the same thing in the United Kingdom, the same thing in Italy. So we're seeing a stagnation of the economy. Now, I can tell you in the United States, you have something similar. But the United States has a strategy of huge expenditures in military, and that's the military-industrial complex. And secondly, the internal fuel, fossil fuel, and so on. But the United States is coming up against a problem of $35 trillion deficit. Someone mentioned earlier, I think it was Christelle also, that France has a very large debt problem. These are things you can't wish away. And the governments will make promises of giving money to people, stimulating things. But ultimately, where are they going to go for income? In the past, it was the neo-colonial system that enabled them to survive. They looted as predators, African countries, Asian countries, and so on. If you have an emergence now of the global South saying, no more, we are sovereign nations, you have to add some value to your activity here in terms of investment and so on, or else we're not going to let you come in. And I think that's what Fidel was also talking about. The assertion of independence and sovereignty means that if you want to come in here, you have to have something that is a win-win, something that will help us. That's not going to come from France right now. That's not going to come from the United States or Germany. These are countries that are now starting to loot their own populations. That's why the French people are so angry. The handful of banks that still exist in Germany and France that are international banks are predatory. They're looting the population. The people have brought up the question of BlackRock. BlackRock is interested in one thing, more power for BlackRock. They're trying to buy up Ukraine with the support of Zelensky. And who knows how much money he's getting from them for privatizing the land so that BlackRock and other companies can buy it. So what I'm saying is the European situation is going to be chaotic for years to come. There's no simple solution coming out of Europe. And that's why I think the looking at the BRICS, and I'm not talking about a Russian colonization program, I'm talking about the ability to actually move to a mutually beneficial cooperative relationship, to use the terms of Xi Jinping, win-win. And that's why China is playing such a larger role in Africa. I don't think the Chinese intend to take over Africa. I think they have a sense that they were able to lift 800 million people out of poverty. That model with the Belt and Road Initiative and so on is applicable everywhere. And sovereign nations in Africa are going to have to choose whether they're going to go with China, Russia, the BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or an African Union, because that was the other opportunity. And we remember what happened to that Gaddafi was one of the people pushing that, and look what happened to him. Well, I think the West is going to be less able to do that kind of thing in the future because it's so exposed right now, including exposed in the support and complicity of the genocide in Palestine. So I'm hoping that countries, including in Africa, will realize that if the United States and the British and the French come saying, we want to be your friends, there'll be a recognition that these are the kinds of friends you don't want to let into your house.
Thank you for that. Achille, when the development in France pertaining the call for the for a snappy election by Emmanuel Macron, it came to mind the question of democracy, which is actually democracy is one thing that is tearing Africa apart. Inherited democracy. So the question is, how can Africa transition to a more feasible and practical phase that will suit the prevailing environment and taking the momentum from the drastic political changes across Europe, and particularly in France, given the relationship that African countries have with the France, and with all of these happenings, the political divergence and the call for the dissolution of parliament and all the like. How can this bring to mind the possibility for African states to advocate Africa's solution to African solution to Africans' problems practically, without actually copying from the West or from France?
That's why the Pan-African movement exists. See, I mentioned 600 years, maybe 1,000 years, I don't know how many years exactly. Africa have never had a chance to do anything on its own without the intervention of people, of external people trying to dictate to Africa what they need to do. And so Mr. Fidel, he said so many outrageous things earlier. I was just sitting quiet and calm because I don't want to erupt, because he's exactly using the language of the colonizers. He's using the language of all these foreign countries who are coming to Africa and dictating their will on us. No, you are an African. You have to find your way. We have to find our way based on our culture, our history, our customs, and our traditions. We can't just copy things because somebody is dictating or using the language that those colonizers are using against us. All right. So he said something about French African countries, Cameroon, all these French African colonized countries, about the constitution, that we copied the constitution of France. Well, since independence, we never had a chance to sit together as African countries and create a constitution. Those laws that are ruling those countries today are the laws or the constitution that were put in place by the colonizers themselves. We never had a chance to change or to give our opinion. our people have never had a chance to voice their opinion on putting together that those constitutions that are in those countries today. And so what we're seeing, in the Sahelian countries is a chance for them to rewrite the constitution inherited from the colonizers, and then so that they can, make it theirs based on their customs, their traditions, and their histories. So it's important. We all need to understand. We all want our people to be free, but we have to find a way to do it. In the position where we are today, we are very weak in terms of, power. We are looking for a way to gain power or leverage whatever power we may have against those foreigners who are colonizing us, who are dictating us what we need to do. So the gentleman mentioned something about the Russian, that the Russians are not going to do this and that. We are not asking the Russians to come and replace the colonizers. That's not what we're looking for. We are looking for somebody, for example, Nigeria had a situation with Boko Haram. Boko Haram in Nigeria was killing so many people. Nigeria called the United States and bought weapons, paid weapons for, so that they can fight those terrorists, Boko Haram terrorists. Guess what? The United States refused. They took the money and they refused to give them weapons. What was the reason? Were human rights. The same thing happened with Mali. Same thing happened with Burkina Faso. Same thing happened with all these Sahelian countries that have been facing terrorism. They all wanted to buy weapons from France, from Europe, from all these countries. They refused. Guess what? They turned to Russia and they got the weapons they are using today to fight those terrorists. Okay, Mr. Fidel is saying the situation is worse today than it was, before the French people left. Guess what? The French were in Mali for 10 years. 10 years. How many military people were how many French military people were in Mali? How many? About 5,000 people. 5,000 military people in Mali. When they came in Mali, it was only 20% of Mali that was invaded by terrorists. When they left, when they were kicked out by the Malian government, it was 80%, including the current president who was fighting against those terrorists. When he got to an area where the French people were protecting the terrorists, they refused to allow them to go and fight in that area. And so when that happened, he was so mad. So that's why he did that coup. And he did the coup, and knowing exactly what the French people were doing. They were just there to protect terrorists so they can divide the country. The goal was to divide Mali in two parts. And that was the underlying goal. So they were pretending to fight terrorists, but they're not really doing anything. Same thing with MINUSMA, the United Nations, a group of people who were there, the MINUSMA. They were just doing nothing, just enjoying their time in Mali. So there are so many things that my friend needs to learn more about what's happening in the continent before saying all kinds of stuff. We are looking for countries like Russia, China, who are going to help us with the weapons, the tools that we need to fight terrorists, and then free our country so we can have an opportunity to sit down and reorganize our countries, in a way that will allow us to be independent and work with whoever is willing to work with us in a win-win situation. That's the strategy here for Pan-Africanists. That's what we're doing here. We're not looking for a master. We don't care. That's not what we're looking for. We're not moving from one master to another one. So I think we're going to have another debate on that. But to come back to your question,
should be rounding off already.
Clarice?
Yeah.
Yes. Right. So can you say your question again, just so I can remember?
I think I should come back to you subsequently because
I mean, it's just so many things we need to say today. All I can say is
give the opportunity for other speakers to comment. Mr. Eke, I'll come back to you. And Christelle, we're looking at the point of the troop deployment, and Mr. Eke just highlighted some aspect now. So let's particularize on the stance. it should be noted that the European Union is already at the 14th sanction against Russia, which has touched even other countries that still collaborate well with the Russian Federation. Now we're looking at the position of France in deploying troops to the Donbass, to the Kyiv government. Now with the changes, it should Le Pen's party, overwhelm the government in France. Do you see a situation where it will maybe curtail the deployment of troops to the Kyiv government, and how will this affect the peace process advocated for by some the major actors concerned in seeing that the crisis in the Donbass, or the crisis between the Russian Federation and Ukraine, is solved amicably?
You have to understand that in France, there are some areas which are the prerogative of the president. It's a case of the military and the foreign policy. So even if Jordan Bardella is the prime minister, if the president really decides to send troops to Ukraine, Mr. Bardella can do nothing, honestly. So that's the first point. The only one who could do something is the parliament, if he would be consulted. But we have seen that Mr. Macron is not a specialist of the consulting of the will of deputies. So he has used so many times this Article 49.3 that you understand that he doesn't mind absolutely about what the Parliament is thinking about what he's doing or not. So I don't think. But what I think is, again, in all this political game, because I don't think that Emmanuel Macron decided to dissolve the parliament like on burned head, like, oh, okay, I'm fed up, they rejected me, so I don't believe that. I don't believe that. I don't believe this idea. Absolutely not. I think he has a plan behind that. And to have a cohabitation government could be also a plan to step back on this idea of sending troops. Why? Because we have seen Emmanuel Macron did this really declaration, really sensational and so on. But then he had Mr. Scholz and others who tapped on his shoulder and say, "Oh, Emmanuel, we do not agree to send our troops there. I think Germans will remember what it cost them to go to the east. I think the memory is still really tough in Germany, and the Germans don't want to leave what lived there, their grandparents, and there are a lot of other European countries who don't want to send their troops out from all these Russophobic states like the Baltic states and Poland. But the others don't want to send their soldiers to die in this war, because a lot of European countries now understand that Ukraine cannot win, and the fact to send their troops will not help at all. I mean, most of European armies have, sorry to do that, but they made a striptease. They stripped themselves to give weapons, to give means to the Ukrainian army. I mean, for example, the Danish army gave all its artillery to Ukraine. How they can be useful without what is the god of war? What they call the god of war is artillery. So how can they expect to make some difference on the front? The French army gave like 1/3 of its Caesar cannons, of its artillery to Ukraine. 1/3. They already have very few, and they gave 1/3 of them to Ukraine. And it's the same for most of the European armies. They gave a lot of tanks, of air defense, and now they are without them, because all these systems are very low to make. I mean, to do some Caesar, you need some years. I mean, just to produce like 10 or 12, you need to wait a few years. I mean, it's huge. while at the same time in Russia, they are producing hundreds and thousands of tanks, of armored vehicles per year. And so I think Macron did this declaration to be sensational, and then the guys from NATO came and tapped on the shoulder and said, "But you are mad or what? We will not send our guys officially, you know." And so now he had to step back, and I think the fact that he could have a cohabitation government could be a good excuse to say, but okay, but I wanted to send, but I cannot because my prime minister does not agree with that, you know. So I think that's a possibility also. I don't think that France will send officially troops. I think there are already French troops on the ground. I think it's mainly things like Foreign Legion or people who are officially on vacation, but that are officially instructors, but who are in reality manipulating the Western weapons. Why? Because, as I said, for example, France has provided to Ukraine a lot of Caesars cannons, but they were mainly destroyed on the battlefield, and which means they're equipage, people who were manipulating the Ukrainian soldiers which were trained to manipulate these weapons. Most of them have been killed with their weapon. So what does it mean? It means the new Caesar cannons which are given, who is manipulating them? It's the same for all these attacks, Storm Shadows, and so on missiles. The Ukrainians don't have the ability and competencies to manage these weapons. So we already understand that they are Americans, they are British, they are Polish, and they are French, let's say, instructors, which are not really instructors, and who are there on the ground. But it's not official. But to send officially French soldiers, I think it would make such a chaos in France that Macron understands that it will really jeopardize his place. So I think the fact to have a cohabitation government will not change his political mind. It will just give him an excuse to step back from his stupid declaration.
Talking about cohabitation government, talking about coalition government, it is becoming more and more prevalent in today's political dispensation. Back to you, Fidel. Let's look at how these major changes will affect, changing the power dynamics or the balance of power across the global world, and if the coalition government should be born in France, let's relate to the existing already government of national unity in South Africa. What how is this negatively affecting, or how will could this negatively affect the foreign policies of countries? Let's take the example of taking major decisions, especially decisions on security and defense.
Thank you very much for this opportunity once again. Firstly, the thing about coalition governments is always characteristics of a particular system. So in the US, it's unlikely to find a coalition government in the US because of the electoral system of that country. So France is a multi-party democracy, and the propensity of it having a coalition government is always high. Now, if you consider the fact that this is happening, we have to note that this was not an event. It has been a process. The rise of the right has been a process. So, I mean, in Italy, in Central Europe, or Northern Europe, we see right-wing movements rising. And it is because of some policies, energy policies. We have people who feel that this issue of climate change is not realistic, and so government should fend off any policies towards correcting climate measures and all that. They should stick to traditional ways of doing things. We find people who are going ultra-conservative and therefore joining the right and things like that. And so it has not been an event. It has been a process in Italy and other places. But my argument has always been that even if Marine Le Pen is to take control of the French government, I don't see any radical changes, as in the next day France leaves EU. I don't see that happening. I see that there will be some policies that may be different from the centrists, but any radical changes, as in some France exit from EU, we are not going to see. Continental Europe will always approach politics different from the British Isles, and so that is very important. Now, in case of Africa, or in the case of Africa, Africa, as I said, will have to define its interest. Whoever that is in control in Europe, it will take the decision makers in Africa to either maximize the benefits from their relationship with these leaders or not. And this brings us to some of the things. You know, as Africans, sometimes we have to be realistic. For instance, to say that Nigeria paid money to US and never got weapons is total fallacy. It never happened. Nothing like that ever happened. I mean, this is something that we can just Google and find out. It never happened. There's nothing like that. That Nigeria paid money and never got weapons. No, with the US, it didn't happen. And it is when we approach issues more realistically that we will get realistic results. The issue that the Sahel is currently among the top 10 most destabilized places on earth is a fact. And a lot of documents and research points to this. And as an African researcher who knows where every country is located and whoever that is neighbor to that African country, I know what I say. Another thing is, in my talk about Cameroon and other countries adopting French colonial or post-colonial constitution, that is the Fifth Republican Constitution, I was saying that that was actually negative and did not say that that was really the rationale for the domination of France. No. So these are some of the things. And the fact that Russia is exploiting the Sahel is so clear. Gold and other resources are taken and not being accounted for, and Russian planes are landing from Moscow to the Sahel and exploiting. And myself, as a Pan-Africanist, I think that it's about time we define things so clearly, we stay away from propaganda, tackle issues more objectively, and that's where we are going to get results. Often, we live in our own bubble, and we tend to create things that are not non-existent, and that affect us as Africans. So this is my submission. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fidel, for that. Coming back to you, Arnaud, DEVELAY, we're almost culminating. So we look at the prospect for France and, you know, what to expect after the 7th of July, 2024 legislative elections.
Well, there's three scenarios. The first scenario is National Front wins absolute majority, and we have a Bardella, most likely Bardella government-led government. This would not change much because, as was mentioned earlier, in drawing example from Meloni in Italy, those parties have taken the road to Damascus. I mean, they've completely absorbed the pro-EU stance. They do not want to leave the EU. Brexit has been completely abandoned as a concept, which is actually the only issue that was not on the ballot on June 9th, unfortunately. And the few parties who advocated consistently in favor of France leaving the EU were relegated to the limbos, legal limbo of as far as people voting for it. So France is stuck into the EU, and therefore all its foreign policy and its sovereignty, as understood under according to the 4 pillars of sovereignty, are in the hands of Brussels and the unelected European Commission. What we should keep in mind, as far as since we are on a Pan-African podcast, is that a Le Pen or Bardella-led government is likely to actually promote independence for African countries more so than the middle centralist blob led by Macron. A few weeks back, former chief of staff actually associated with the Macron regime literally went out and said that within 10 years, France would have to re-enter Africa and assert itself forcefully. This is not what Marine Le Pen's program calls for. Marine Le Pen calls for the development of what's called the l'or bleu, the blue gold. France has possessions and departments in overseas, and this is actually more what the National Front would do. It would somehow recenter its economic policy, trying to develop those huge resources and free economic trade zone in places such as the Antilles, such as Caledonia, albeit if we get to resolve the current situation there. And African countries, would not have to be concerned by the National Front or the National Rally running fronts. Quite on the contrary. As far as the Ukraine, it's a different ballgame. We've had very conflicting statements from Bardella, and to the extent Macron is trying to somehow, because Macron is running to be the first European Union president. Make no mistake about it, this is what he wants. He's completely seceding from the notion of being the leader of France. He actually even said himself, French culture does not exist. And so he's completely off the ground, or hors sol, as we call it. His aim is to somehow remain in the history books. And in that respect, despite what was said earlier, as far as Bardella being able to put the brakes on some of the most incendiary statements made by Macron, Macron is taking over this small coalition, including Romania and some of the Baltic states and Poland, in sending troops on the ground. I'm afraid that this could be used as a tripwire to justify a full-on NATO involvement, try to snatch defeat out of the jaws of victory, or should I say, snatch defeat from the jaws of defeat. And so this is what makes the character Macron very dangerous. He's not going to resign. Far from it. He's surfing on chaos. He's thriving on chaos. And all he wants is the chance to declare, if he can, the state of war, Article 16, assume full power, rule by decree, and essentially expedite the agenda for which he was corrupted by the oligarchy.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Let's get a concluding statement from you, gentlemen and lady, pertaining a topic for discussion today. And I kick off with you, Christelle. What is the take-home package as we continue to observe the major changes happening in France particularly, and in the European Union and elsewhere across the globe?
No, I think in Europe the chaos will continue growing. I mean, like some people like Mite Orlov or other people who are specialists of the collapse of society said the European Union is following the path of the Soviet Union, and so it will end the same way. And so the more they go, as Arnaud DeVeلاي said, the elites, the governing elites are not connected with the ground. They are not connected with Earth anymore. They are completely disconnected from their people. At some point it will lead to a catastrophe. So I think we are already at the turning point. The multipolar world is building. The world is changing. So I think it's clearly the moment for other countries to, like in Africa, like in South America, and in Asia, to take this opportunity to build better relationships with countries which are ready to make real partnerships with them and not to use them as colonies, and to let Europe face the consequences of their choices. I think there's a moment, the European elites didn't want to take the train of the multipolar world, and I think it will cost them a lot, like we see today with the economy, which is collapsing because they are adopting sanctions. You talked about the 14 packs of sanctions. It's like shooting themselves in the head, clearly, and so it will have really harsh consequences, both on economy and on politics in Europe. I think they will go up to the point of chaos, and when all these structure will collapse, then perhaps it will be possible for European countries to retake their sovereignty and join the multipolar world will already be built and functioning. So that's what I see as the future.
Okay, thank you, of course, for that. 1 minute with you, Achille Eke. Take-home package, especially as far as Africa's position is concerned in the global world. Achille Eke?
Oh, that's me? Okay, sorry. We got a little sound issue here. Right, so yes, I think thank you so much for this fantastic debate. I think we come out of this conversation, you know, knowing that the world is going to be a better place, you know, because of the troubles that's happening in the Western world, you know, so that's going to force them to be humble and, you know, treat other people, other cultures, other people around the world with a different view. Because what we see is chicken is coming home to roost, you know, they're reaping what they saw. For how many years? For hundreds of years, they have been dominating, you know, other cultures, killing people all over the world, destroying countries, destroying, you know, civilizations. I mean, for what? What is the point of doing all that disaster, creating all that disaster, just because you want to dominate? Listen, there is a time for everything, you know. The time to do, you can do your crazy stuff. And there's a time where you have to pay for, you know, all the bad decisions that you made. So what we see in the whole Western world today is they are paying for, you know, slowly. You know, we're witnessing the Western world going south, and it's going to happen, you know, gradually but effectively. And so we in the southern part of the world, especially Africa, we have an opportunity. We have a big open window to chart our own course, to work with whoever is going to give us, you know, a beneficial partnership, you know, that will allow us to be able to, you know, do the things that we want to do. And that's going to start by us, you know, being together, working together as one, and defining what our goals are, what our objectives are, and then setting our sights into realizing all these objectives with the different partners that are going to give us that opportunity. So thank you for inviting me. It was a fantastic debate. I appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you, Achille Eke, for being there. One last word, just a few seconds from you, Harley.
Okay, well, Clarissa, I share the view of others to thank you for putting this together. Let me be very brief. There are tectonic shifts underway in the world. We didn't even discuss de-dollarization, which is another important development. Yeah. The delusions of power of the rules-based order, they're going to have a rough landing. Not just Macron, but the people running the United States, the United Kingdom, the City of London. The dollar system is in terrible shape. The Saudis are moving out of it. I think what we're going to see is a move from financialization to physical economy. And this is where Africa is perhaps the most important player in the future because of the raw material wealth, and I include within the raw material wealth the large population of young people who are looking for a better future and are realizing they're not going to find it from the Western model. And so if we can put that together with sovereign nations, with using raw materials for the development of the nation as a sovereign nation representing the interests of their people, Africa is the future. And anyone in the West who doesn't recognize that and thinks that they can keep dictating the terms of the policy are going to be left out on a ledge somewhere with no future. So I'm very optimistic overall, and I thank you again. I appreciate having a chance to exchange views with the other panelists.
Okay. Thank you for making it count this day. Harley, just 5 seconds from you. Fidel, take-home package as we continue to watch developments in France and elsewhere.
Yeah, thank you very much. The history of the world is the history of change. And then when one particular entity dominates for a while, others come in. But in doing so, domestically, you would have to choose what is in your best interest. Ironically, whereas many Europeans fight for the sovereignty of their countries, Africans, and especially Pan-Africanists like me, want African countries to drop their sovereignty so that they come together as one in order to form a stronger bond, in order to be relevant in the scheme of things around the world. Okay. That is the irony of this whole discussion. And so in Africa, just after independence, we saw Kwame Nkrumah saying that unity of Africa is what is going to propel the continent ahead of others, or be able to give the continent that kind of bargaining power to stand with the great powers. Okay. But internal divisions did not allow that. And going forward, I think that it's about time that we strengthen our institutions at the regional level, sub-regional levels, in order to come together, trade among ourselves, especially the African continental free trade area that we've created should be intensified. We should remove border and other restrictions in order to trade among ourselves, okay, and then build ourselves to really sit down with the great powers when we are negotiating, so that when we are negotiating, we will have that kind of strength to fight for our interests.
That's the agenda. Indeed, that's the agenda for Africa. Let's culminate with you 10 seconds, Arnaud Devely. Is Arnaud still with us?
Yes, I'm still here. Well, Clarice, I wanted to thank you for a very enriching debate and conversation with a wide variety of speakers. To be sure, this election tomorrow will have an impact, but only within the context of French politics, and to the extent Macron is the wild card in this. He will strive, no matter what the scenario, he will strive on chaos, okay, and somehow work to extend his political lifetime, with the idea again of comforting and making the stranglehold of Brussels over French politics even stronger. This would have could have potential impact not only on the Ukraine conflict, because it's a kind of a doubling down approach, but unfortunately also on Africa, because Macron represents interests who are not likely to allow African reserves to get away. Yeah. To the extent the National Front were to somehow assume responsibilities in running a government, I will concur with what Christelle was saying in as far as Ukraine is concerned, and apply it to Africa. He may actually be putting the brakes on spending blood and treasure in trying to somehow revisit the past. Okay. So we'll see what happens tomorrow, but in any event, France is in for quite a ride, and this will have consequences, whether in Europe or in Africa. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you to gentlemen and lady for the great insight. And this is it is on this note that we're going to draw the curtains into today's edition of Global Insight, reiterating that it is indeed another view of the world. Do have a lovely moment in the company of our transmissions. Bye-bye.